Greetings, friends. Wandingruska here, and I hope you guys are having a wonderful, happy new year, and I hope the new year brings a lot of blessings for y'all. Alright, and this is the weekly Russo-Ukrainian War video update for the week of December 25th through 31st of 2023, the last week of 2023, and this week we have some updates. We're going to begin actually this time in Marinka. So last week we talked about how Marinka was captured by the Russian forces and it's in its full administrative borders. The town itself was captured earlier this month, around the beginning of December. However, Marinka itself is a bit of an extension of its administrative borders was still in some parts under Ukrainian control. However, this week that is no longer the case. The Russians have pushed the Ukrainians all the way out of Marinka and the Ukrainians have retreated back to the village Grigoriivka here. The Ukrainians are probably, held up in these warehouses, these kind of big buildings here, and probably in the center of the village right here, while as the Russians are now pushing forward in the first houses of Grigoriivka proper along this reservoir right here. So this week, the Russians managed to reach the dam right here. They managed to reach this roundabout here. They are right now on the outskirts of this church, and they are also reaching the first houses of Grigoriivka, which are these places right here. So the Russians have expanded their buffer zone out of Marinka and now have begun clashes for Grigoriivka. I mentioned this last week, but the short-term goal of the Russians for the next 2 or 3 months in this area is to capture this village and reach this dam, this reservoir right here. This will give them there's 2 reasons for this, as I mentioned last week. One is to push Ukrainian artillery away from Donetsk, because not only once they reach this, they could also begin attacks to the back of Krasnogorivka right here, and this would put this area in jeopardy. And also, as they advance towards one of the biggest Russian goals of Karakova right here, they will be able to help Russian efforts in the Novomikhailivka direction to help cut off Ukrainian troops in Ugledar. So it's kind of a double purpose. But there's been no changes near Novomikhailivka or Ugledar this week, only near Marinka, as they are expanding towards Grigoriivka, and now basically it's a test of how good Ukrainian defenses here are. I'm pretty certain they're pretty well, obviously they've had since 2014 to build up the Marinka defenses. However, they've only had 1 or 2 years to build up the defenses in Grigoriivka, but that's plenty of time to build a decent enough defense. So we'll see how strong this village can hold out. But yeah, Russians have expanded out of Marinka and reached the dam and are now beginning. The Battle of Grigoriivka has started this week. Let us now go to Bakhmut. This is one of the hottest points of the conflict has been going on for the last month, and the fighting has not died down, but there is still a lot of changes happening on this front as well. The Russians managed to recapture the cemetery from the Ukrainians right here and enter and start clashes for what they call the Popovki Forest in this area right here. Capturing this Popovki Forest is the last key strong point the Russians need to take, which allows them to basically fully capture. Basically, it gives them the ability to start advancing to the north of Ivanivska if they want to, along with basically securing the right flank of Bogdanovka. In order to fully secure Bogdanovka, they need to capture this other forest, this area right here. This is this is on the hill, and taking this and the Popovki Forest is basically the 2 things Russia needs to do if they want to fully secure Bogdanovka. And so far, right now the front lines around about 60% of the village is under Ukrainian control, about 40% is under the Russian control. But in order to fully take this village, because it's so elongated, they have to take the heights, because if they assault it directly, the Ukrainians could rain fire on the side. So one of the key nodes is the Popovki Forest, and also this kind of railway junction right here that the Russians are still trying to storm and take. So if they could take this and the Popovki Forest, Bogdanovka will fall. So that's been the changes in the northern sector. So they managed to recapture some of the places they lost during the localized Ukrainian offensive that happened here last week. So the cemetery and the Popovki Forest is now the cemetery got captured, and the Popovki Forest is now being fought over. So yeah, that's happened in the northern front. There is clashes happening in the southern front. The Russians are right now focused on this hill right here, this forest right here. A lot of geolocated footage has come out of of Russians assaulting kind of this northern area right here and shelling this area right here. They're probably trying to capture this area and just slowly take whatever they have the dominant height. However, there is still some localized heights that prevent the Russians from completely capturing Klishevka. So, however, so far there's been slow progress on the southern front compared to the northern front. But again, the same purpose as always is to reach the Servetsky for this winter campaign that the Russians are doing, is to reach the Servetsky Donetsk Donbass Canal and then start putting the squeeze on Chasiv Yar. So hopefully, the goal probably is by the March or so. Is to by about March or so probably is to get Grigorievka, get Bogdanovka, Ivanivska, Klishevka, and then reach the canal. That's probably the goal. So that's happening in Bakhmut. While we're in Bakhmut, let's talk about the Seretsk front. We're actually going to be talking about the southern Seretsk front. So this week, the Russians there's been geolocated footage of Russians being in the southern part of Spornia, this area right here. You can actually see that the map has been updated. As you can see, this village has been reduced to ruin. There is nothing left of this village. You can see basically everything has been razed to the ground. However, this place still will allow the Russians a forward position to continue digging into Ukrainian defenses. Spornia is still somewhat captured by the Ukrainians, but we will see if the Russians could continue their progress and capture this whole village. Yeah, they managed to advance into Spornia and advance to the southern part right here. Along with this, the Russians have continued their advancements up along this rail line from Bilogorivka and Berestorva here. The purpose of this whole operation is to capture Spornia and get closer to the new Ukrainian defense line in Vimka and Ivano-Darivka. These two small villages are where the Ukrainians are going to start holding their defense, because if these things fall, then it's open season for Seversk. Now, I don't think they're going. Obviously, the Russians want to capture Seversk. However, I don't think that is possible until the Russians manage to do some sort of big advance in the Liman direction. So in order to and basically get progress in the Serebransky forest. Otherwise, the Ukrainians will be able to block the Russians from advancing. However, I also think the purpose of this for the winter is to this is a third tier rate of advance. They're trying to basically hold down Ukrainian forces in the Severodsk front and basically prevent them from redeploying to like Bakhmut or other areas that are of more bigger importance. Also, another good purpose of advancing along this rail line to Vimka and Ivano-Darivka is that they're trying to outflank Ukrainian positions in the lowlands near Rostivlivka and Vasola. Because if they manage to start clashes for these areas, they could start going to the side here, reaching this rail line, and basically force the Ukrainians to retreat back further north. And basically, they could start clearing this kind of fields here in the south of Seversk. So small progress in Seversk, small progress in Bakhmut, but it is still progress nonetheless. Let us talk with Avdiivka now. This is Russians. The Russians are actually they're on the defensive and on the offensive here. So in the offensive side, the Russians they actually managed to advance right up to the Orchechny Dachas, this area right here, which is the intersection of all these railway lines that go out of Orchechny, that goes towards, this rail line goes towards towards Bakhmut or such, I think, and this place goes down to Donetsk or Avdiivka. And so the Russians are basically advancing north because these two rail lines, give them a natural defensive position. I don't know if the Russians will attack this Orchechny Dachas directly, but as I mentioned, but basically this is capturing this would put Ukrainian forces in Novokilinova and Orchechny in a worse position. The Russians also managed to capture more positions to the south of Novokilinova. Right now, looks like they advanced up to this tree line right here. And so more positions to the south of Novikolovan are being taken, and right now Russian troops are on the outskirts of it. It looks like in the basically this month of December, Russian troops have made a lot of advances to the north of Krasnogorivka, which helps a bit, but it doesn't really help them much in terms of actually encircling Avdiivka, which, let's go to Stopova, because that's where the fighting is supposed to be taking place. However, this is where the Russians are on the defensive. So the Russians are advancing to the north. They're also actually advancing to the south here. They actually managed to capture more parts of this Avdiivka dachas in the north here. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're going to continue trying to take these dachas to the here, because then it allows them a better. They still have this rail line as defensive from Ukrainian positions in the coke plant, and it's easier to attack these dachas than being out in the open. However, the fighting here is still slow. So the Russians are advancing here. Russians are advancing in the south, but there was no major changes this week, but they are pushing here as much as they can. I'm still surprised to see that they haven't expanded their bridgehead in the residential area from the industrial zone. That still is the same, but that's one place they want to advance as well. So the Russians are advancing in Avdiivka slowly. However, one place they're on the defense is in their small bridgehead on the western side of this rail line near Stopova. And so basically, in this week, last week, the Russians basically had mostly in control of all of Stopova. However, this week, the Ukrainians launched a counterattack and managed to make most of this village go into the gray zone, with Russia only occupying about the eastern part of the village, and the western and central part being in the gray zone. So this village has been razed to the ground for the most part. Yeah, so the Russians are trying to hold on to the small bridgehead they have and try to secure Stopova. However, the Ukrainians are trying to deny that and push them back to the rail line and basically foil Russian attempts from enveloping Avdiivka from the north, which is why I think the Russians are going to now focus on just trying to take Avdiivka directly. Even though that's not what they intended. The dense minefields of the south near Severna and Tonivka, the inability of the Russians to create a stable enough bridgehead to expand out of Stopova, basically will forces the Russians to attack Avdiivka directly. So there's that. Let's see where we also want to talk about. Let's talk about Zaporozhye. So there's it looks like this week there's been a lot of changes on the Zaporozhye front. It looks like, from the looks of it, the Ukrainians are falling back slowly to where the pre-offensive line was, near Novodinivka and Malotokmachka and such. I think basically the Ukrainians are now on the defensive, and they're trying to shorten areas of the front where they're losing so much troops for really no reason. I think that's why they ultimately gave up Marinka, because while yes, they could continue just sending waves of meat to Marinka to deny Russians a political victory there, it's like there's really no purpose to continue holding one street of Marinka where you send people there to die, and they don't have the troops for that anymore. Same thing here, I think. I think they're making a choice that, hey, now that we know it's basically fruitless to advance in Zaporozhye, basically being surrounded on three sides here and just continuously sending troops into this salient is just a recipe for them to keep getting bombed and destroyed. So it's much easier to defend in Orekov in these more, making it more straight line, so the Russians only have they can only fire straight ahead, not on three positions. And so they're slowly getting pushed back. The Russians managed to recapture places to the east of Novopokrovka and to the west of Verbova. They managed to recapture parts of the first Russian line of defense, as you can see with this yellow line. They also managed to advance to the west of Robotina and are trying to put pressure on the main artery that supplies Robotina from Ukrainian positions in Orchechevy, or Orekov, I should say. So I think the Ukrainians are taking this, they're retreating maybe one tree line a day at a time, probably. I still don't know if that's completely confirmed yet, but it looks like Russia's made a lot of progress in the fields here. And it looks like they're trying to basically retreat back to where things were, because the Ukrainians are reorienting their defense and basically trying to give up positions that are making them lose a lot more troops than they need to. And basically they're going to probably give up this pocket by March or so. So Or maybe they're not. Maybe the Russians just they withdrew so many troops from Zaporozhye to defend other fronts that this is now a weak spot for the Ukrainians. The Russians are not pushing and gonna flatten the area here. So yes, the Russians are advancing now in Zaporozhye. Um, they're also in Kherson. There's been no changes in the Kherson front. However, there was the Ukrainians brought up their anti-air systems here. It seems like the command in Kherson is very competent. It seems like they have a lot of good FPV operators, a lot of electronic warfare people here. They also brought up anti-air defense and managed to shoot down a Russian jet, a fighter jet. Basically, and for this week, the Russians basically dramatically slowed down the amount of FAB bombings of Krinky. And so basically there's less pressure on Krinky. However, Ukrainians, while they still have position, they still have not been able to expand out of Krinky or get any extra land in the last month or two. Basically, it's just a small bridgehead, and based on what I've seen in other parts of the front, I'm pretty sure they're also going to give up Krinky and just basically hold position with territorial defense along the Dnieper River, and then send their Marines to other places where the Russians are advancing to stop them. So we're seeing the Ukrainians basically withdraw from places that are just basically meat grinders, and just basically for small little defeats they could save their. They're trying to preserve their forces from losing too much men. Um, Let us now begin to talk about the Luhansk front, the Oskol front here. There's been no changes in the Kupinsk area, but there has been some changes in the Liman area, and basically the Torskoye salient is no more. Basically, the reason why I say this is because before this was just a giant salient towards the village of Torskoye. However, Russia has been advancing to the north of the Torskoye salient towards the village of Terny. The main goal here is to reach the Zhirbets River, which is the first milestone before they could advance to the Oskol River. The Zhirbets River would basically reaching it would be a good buffer and liberate basically most of the rest of Luhansk oblast. That there's a few villages here that the Ukrainians control that prevent the Russians from saying they control Luhansk oblast entirely. So reaching the Zhirbets River would capture most of those villages. So it's more of like a political victory, but also helps them with defensive posture. And basically, this week they managed to advance to the north and managed to continue advancing closer to Terny, and basically trying to capture these ravines in these forest belts on the outskirts of Terny and Yampolovka. So the Russians made more advances here, about 1 to 2 kilometers. So we'll see if they could continue advancing and reach Terny. So that's the things on the front. There's been actually a lot of things happening outside the front. The Ukrainians earlier this week managed to bomb and destroy the Russian ship Nova Rushash, some Russian name I can't pronounce it, in the village of Fedosa using a modern NATO Storm Shadow missile. Before they weren't able to target it. However, I think the UK sent them an actual modernized Storm Shadow, and they managed to sink a Russian landing ship. It wasn't a critical one. It wasn't like one that's. It was one that would land troops, but it wasn't like a critical one. So it's not like it is kind of embarrassing for Russia to lose it, but it wasn't. It doesn't affect the war effort much at all. However, in response to this, the Russians managed to launch one of the largest missile campaigns in in Ukraine in this war so far. They targeted spots in Kiev. They targeted spots in Lvov. Mostly training grounds. There was a military tank factory that was hit in Kiev. They managed to hit air bases in like Mirgorod here near Poltava. There's in like this city name that I will never be able to pronounce. They basically managed to hit airfields. They managed to hit ammo depots. They hit port infrastructure in Odessa. They hit accumulation of Ukrainian troops in Dnieper, um, and so forth. So they managed to launch this giant retaliation strike on military targets, meaning that I think the Russians are basically holding back, and they have like strict rules of engagement because Russian leadership just wants to, and it's basically like, hey, if they escalate, we'll escalate. So they managed to bomb a Russian ship, and because of that, they will now they will now target various infrastructure in Ukraine. However, Ukrainians didn't like that, and they managed to do a very vicious terrorist attack on Belgorod. They used Czech like cluster munition, or they used checked vampire artillery systems to launch cluster munitions into the center of Belgorod. They targeted the center of like the near the city plaza, the University of Belgorod. There was like near an ice skating rink. They basically targeted, like there was a shopping mall. They basically targeted the most populated area as people were going about trying to buy their New Year's Eve party, like New Year's Eve or New Year's Day supplies. According to estimates, about 30 people, I think 24 people died, including 3 children, and about 114 people were injured in that single attack. And so that was a very vicious attack. This is also not only was this was also the first time the Ukrainians used NATO weaponry to directly attack a Russian city that is internationally known as part of Russia. So this was a very a big terrorist attack with a lot of deaths for basically no military reason. It was just for revenge. Now, in revenge to that, the Russians last night launched attacks on Kharkov. They hit called the Kharkov Palace Hotel, which basically hosted a bunch of foreign mercenaries. They also had forward deployment points in Kharkov, especially in Volchansk right here, where they said that's where they fired from the rockets from, and so they basically they also managed to strike the Karakova thermal power plant in Karakova, and they also started targeting places in Kiev and some other places, but we don't know the details of those strikes yet as well. So yeah, lots of big lots of back and forths and tit for tats. Russia's on the offensive for their winter, and this winter is going to be pretty bloody. So we're going to see how much Russia could advance as Ukraine continues to try to consolidate into their new defensive positions. So that's the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of the war. Give this video a like and comment your thoughts. And share this video around, and make sure to subscribe to my channel to see more videos similar to this one. So aim high and wander on.